The moon hung like a broken promise over Grey Hollow Village when the soldiers came for Alara. She had been kneeling in the dirt behind the baker's shop, scrubbing pots with hands already raw from the day's labor. When she heard the rhythmic thunder of hooves on frozen ground, the entire village seemed to hold its breath. Soldiers from the northern reach never brought good news. And when they wore the obsidian crest of House Vorner, the Lycan King's own sigil, they brought only terror. Alara pressed herself against the stone wall, water dripping from her reddened fingers. Through the narrow gap between buildings, she watched torchlight flicker across armored chests and the cold gleam of steel. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Alara Thorn. The voice cut through the winter night with the authority of a blade. By order of King Cale Vorner, you are summoned to Blackstone Fortress. The pot slipped from her grasp and clattered against the cobblestones. Every eye in the square turned toward the sound, toward her. Alara's breath came in short, visible puffs as she slowly stood, her worn dress clinging to her thin frame. The village headman stepped forward, wringing his weathered hands. There must be some mistake. Alara is nobody, just an orphan, a servant. She has no value to the crown. Her father's debt has value. The captain's face remained impassive beneath his helm. Marcus Thorne borrowed gold from the crown to fund his merchant ventures. He died before repayment. The debt passes to his blood. Alara's mouth went dry. She had been 12 when her father died, leaving her with nothing but his name and the shame of his failures. She had spent 6 years invisible, moving from household to household, trading labor for scraps and a corner to sleep in. She owned nothing. She was nothing. I have no gold, she said quietly, her voice barely carrying across the square. I cannot pay what I don't possess. The captain's expression shifted, not quite sympathy, but something close to pity. The king doesn't want gold, girl. He wants a bride. The words hung in the frozen air like an execution sentence. Murmurs rippled through the gathered villagers, a mix of shock and relief that it wasn't one of their own daughters being claimed. Alara felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. A bride? The headman's voice cracked. The Lycan King wants to marry a debt collector's orphan. That's madness. That's politics. The captain gestured sharply to his men. The Alpha Council demands he take a mate before the winter solstice, or they'll challenge his right to rule. He needs a wife of human blood, one with no political ties, no family to leverage the bond for power. She's perfect. Perfect. The word tasted like ash in Alara's mouth. She had never been perfect at anything except disappearing. You can't just take her. The baker's wife, Marta, pushed forward, her flour-dusted apron clutched in her hands. She's just a child. She's 18. Old enough. The captain nodded to his soldiers. Pack her things. I have no things to pack. Alara's voice remained steady despite the trembling in her legs. She had learned long ago that showing fear only made predators circle closer. I'm ready now. The lie tasted bitter, but truth had never protected her before. She was not ready. She would never be ready to marry the monster king of the northern reach, the Lycan who was said to tear apart his enemies with his bare hands during the full moon, who ruled his pack with absolute dominance, whose previous bride had fled the fortress screaming about beasts and blood. But ready or not, she had no choice. The debt was real. The law was clear. And she had spent her entire life being told she had no value beyond what she could provide to others. The captain offered his hand to help her onto the spare horse. Alara ignored it and pulled herself up with the dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose. The leather saddle was cold beneath her thin dress, and she had never ridden a horse before. But she kept her spine straight and her expression blank. As the soldiers led her away from the only home she had ever known, she didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth remembering. Only forward existed, now forward into the darkness of Blackstone Fortress, into the arms of a king who needed a wife he could control, a mate who posed no threat. The journey north took 3 days. They rode through forests where the trees grew so thick that daylight barely penetrated, past villages that shuttered their windows as the obsidian crust passed by, across bridges that spanned frozen rivers like the bones of ancient giants. The soldiers barely spoke to her, treating her with the careful distance reserved for something cursed. On the second night, camped beside a dying fire, Alara overheard 2 guards talking in low voices. Poor girl doesn't know what she's walking into. Better her than someone important. At least when she breaks, no one will start a war over it. You think he'll actually go through with it? The king doesn't seem the marrying type. He doesn't have a choice. The pack laws are absolute and mated alpha can be challenged during the blood moon. And with Roken circling like a vulture, Kale needs the legitimacy. Alara closed her eyes and pretended to sleep, letting their words wash over her. So she was a political shield, nothing more. A human wall between the Lycan King and his enemies. The bond would be a formality, the marriage a legality. She would be invisible, even as a queen. Good. Invisible was safe. Invisible was familiar. On the third day, Blackstone Fortress rose from the mountains like a claw reaching toward the sky. Black stone walls 30 feet high, towers that seemed to pierce the clouds, gates reinforced with iron that looked strong enough to hold back an army. Or keep something monstrous inside. The gates opened with a groan that sounded almost alive. Alara's horse whinnied nervously as they crossed the threshold into shadow. The courtyard beyond was massive, filled with armored guards and servants who moved with the efficiency of a military camp. But it was the silence that struck her most, not peaceful silence, but the tense quiet of a cage holding something dangerous. A steward approached, a thin man with gray hair and the bearing of old nobility. "Miss Thorne, I am Aldrich, Seneschal of Blackstone. The king has been delayed. I will show you to your chambers." Delayed. Alara wondered if that was courtesy or cowardice. Perhaps her future husband was as reluctant as she was. Her chambers were in the East Tower, a suite of rooms larger than any house she had ever lived in. There was a bed with more pillows than she had fingers, a fireplace already crackling with warmth, windows that overlooked the forest stretching endlessly below. It was beautiful. It felt like a very lovely prison. "The king will meet with you at sunset," Aldrich said, pausing at the door. "He requests that you join him in the throne room. There are dresses in the wardrobe. Choose something appropriate." Appropriate. As if she knew what was appropriate for meeting the monster she was meant to marry. When Aldrich left, Alara stood alone in the center of the room, her heart finally allowing itself to race. In 6 hours, she would meet King Kale Vorner. In 6 hours, her life such as it was would end, and whatever came next would begin. She moved to the window and pressed her palm against the cold glass. Somewhere in this fortress, the Lycan King waited. Somewhere in the darkness, her fate was already decided. Alara had spent her whole life being nothing. Perhaps being nothing was exactly what was required to survive becoming a queen. The throne room of Blackstone Fortress was built for intimidation. Alara stood at the entrance. Her borrowed dress midnight blue velvet that made her feel like a child playing pretend hanging awkwardly on her thin frame. The chamber stretched before her like a cathedral of shadow and stone. Columns thick as ancient trees rose toward a vaulted ceiling lost in darkness. Torches burned in iron sconces, their light flickering across tapestries depicting battles between men and beasts. Though who was monster and who was hero remained deliberately unclear. At the far end, elevated on a dais of black stone, sat the throne, empty. "Enter." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Deep and rough, like stone grinding against stone, Alara's fingers trembled, but she forced them still. She had survived 6 years of invisibility by never showing weakness, never giving people a reason to notice her fear. She took one step forward, then another, her soft shoes whispering against the polished floor. The doors behind her closed with a boom that echoed through the chamber, movement in the shadows to her left. Alara turned sharply, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure emerged from behind one of the massive columns, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed entirely in black leather and wool. Even in the dim light, she could see the raw power in the way he moved. The predatory grace of something that had never been prey. King Kale Vorner stepped into the torchlight, and Alara forgot how to breathe. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30 at most, with features carved from the same unforgiving stone as his fortress. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth set in a hard line that suggested smiling was a foreign concept. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, partially obscuring eyes that gleamed like molten amber in the firelight. Wolf eyes, she realized with a chill. Not quite human, even in this form, but it was the tension in him that struck her most. Every muscle seemed coiled, restrained, as if he were holding himself back from something violent. His hands, scarred and powerful, flexed and released in a rhythm that suggested barely controlled restraint. He stopped 10 feet from her, maintaining the distance like a barrier neither could cross. "So you're the debt collector's daughter." His voice carried no warmth, no curiosity, just cold assessment. "Smaller than I expected." Alara lifted her chin, meeting those inhuman eyes, despite every instinct screaming at her to look away. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Your Majesty," Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps at her directness. I didn't say I was disappointed. Merely making an observation. He circled her slowly, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. Do you know why you're here? To pay my father's debt. She kept her voice level, emotionless. To become your wife, so the Alpha Council cannot challenge your right to rule. He stopped in front of her again, those amber eyes narrowing. You're well informed. The guards talk. I listen. And what else do you know about me? Elara considered lying, considered the safe answer. But something in his expression suggested he valued honesty more than flattery. I know you're called the Beast King. I know your previous bride fled. I know the pack fears you as much as they follow you. I know you don't want this marriage any more than I do. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Kale Vorner stared at her with an intensity that made her knees weak, but she held her ground. If he wanted a cowering, simpering bride, he had chosen the wrong orphan. You're right, he said finally. I don't want this. I don't want a mate who'll flinch every time I enter a room. I don't want a wife who'll spend her nights terrified of what I might become when the moon rises. He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, pine and smoke and something wild she couldn't name. But the pack laws are absolute. Unmated alpha equals weakness. Weakness invites challenge. Challenge means war. So I'm a shield, Elara said quietly. A political tool to prevent bloodshed. Yes, no apology in his tone. Can you live with that? She thought of the 6 years spent scrubbing floors, enduring casual cruelty, existing in the spaces between other people's lives. At least here, her invisibility served a purpose. I've lived with worse, she said. Something changed in his expression, not softness exactly, but a crack in the stone. You're honest. That's rare. I have nothing to gain from lies, Your Majesty. I own nothing, am nothing. Honesty is all I have left. Kale. The word came out rough, almost reluctant. When we're alone, you'll use my name. I have enough people who grovel and title me. I don't need it from my wife. Wife. The word felt surreal on her tongue. Kale then. He nodded once, then moved toward the throne, gesturing for her to follow. As she climbed the dais steps, she noticed iron rings embedded in the stone floor behind the throne, and heavy chains coiled nearby. Her stomach turned cold. The ceremony will be in 3 days, Kale said, settling onto the throne with the weariness of someone who carried invisible weight. The pack will attend. The Alpha Council will witness. After that, you'll be queen in name and law, and in reality? Elara asked, standing at the base of the dais, maintaining the distance between them. In reality, you'll stay in your tower. You'll attend formal functions when required. You'll smile and play the part of the devoted mate. And you'll stay away from me during the full moon. His jaw tightened, and she saw the effort it took him to speak the next words. I lose control on those nights. The beast takes over completely. I'm chained in the dungeons beneath the fortress. No one comes near me, especially not you. I'm not afraid of beasts, Elara said, surprising herself with the truth of it. I've known plenty of monsters who wore human skin their whole lives. Kale's amber eyes locked onto hers with sudden, fierce intensity. Don't mistake me for the bullies of your past, Elara Thorne. What I become on the full moon isn't cruel, it's mindless. Savage. I could tear you apart without ever knowing I'd done it. Then I'll stay away. She folded her hands in front of her. The picture of obedience. Is there anything else I should know? He studied her for a long moment, and she felt that strange, pulling sensation in her chest, like something inside her was reaching toward him against her will. She stepped back instinctively, and his eyes narrowed as if he felt it too. One more thing, he said, his voice dropping lower. There's a rival alpha named Roken Steelclaw. He wants my territory, my pack, my throne. He'll use you against me if he can. If he approaches you, if he tries to turn you against me with promises or threats, you tell me immediately. Understood? I won't betray you, Elara said simply. You're paying my father's debt. That makes me yours, whether I like it or not. Don't. The word came out sharp, almost pained. Don't talk about yourself like property. Isn't that what I am? She met his gaze without flinching. A debt payment. A political necessity. You said so yourself. Kale rose from the throne in one fluid motion, moving down the steps toward her. Elara held her ground, though every nerve screamed at her to retreat. He stopped, inches away, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Could see the thin scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Listen carefully, he said. his voice rough with something she couldn't identify. You are here because of circumstances neither of us chose. But you are not property. You are not a thing to be used and discarded. You are my queen, and in this pack, that means something. No one touches you. No one threatens you. Anyone who tries answers to me. Do you understand? The words should have been comforting. Instead, they terrified her, because they meant she mattered to him in some way, and mattering meant visibility. And visibility had never been safe. I understand, she whispered. He held her gaze a moment longer, then stepped back, putting distance between them again. Aldrich will see to your needs. The ceremony is at sunset in 3 days. Until then, familiarize yourself with the fortress. Learn the faces of the pack, and stay away from the dungeons. The dungeons where you're chained during the full moon. Yes, his expression hardened back into stone. Some cages exist for good reasons, Alara. Don't be foolish enough to open them. She nodded, understanding the warning, but also hearing what he didn't say, that he saw himself as the danger, the thing that needed to be contained. That he wore his control like armor, terrified of what lay beneath. I'll leave you to rest, he said, turning away from her. The next few days will be difficult. Alara watched him walk back into the shadows, his broad shoulders carrying tension like a physical weight. Just before he disappeared, he paused. For what it's worth, he said, without turning around, I'm sorry you were dragged into this. You deserved better than a monster for a husband. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the vast throne room, with the scent of pine smoke and the echo of chains. Alara touched her chest where that strange pulling sensation had been. Her heart hammered beneath her palm, and she realized with cold clarity that the next 3 days wouldn't prepare her for anything, because King Kilvorner wasn't what she expected. He wasn't cruel or cold or mindlessly dominant. He was broken, caged, holding himself together with sheer will, and that was so much more dangerous than simple monstrosity. The fortress was a labyrinth of stone and shadow. Alara spent the next morning exploring, her soft shoes silent on the cold floors as she navigated corridors that twisted and turned like the passages of some ancient creature. Servants moved past her with downcast eyes, offering brief curtsies before hurrying on. Guards nodded, but never spoke. She was acknowledged, but not welcomed. The future queen, already invisible. It should have been familiar, comforting even. But something had shifted after last night's meeting with Kale. That pulling sensation in her chest hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, like a thread tied around her ribs that tightened whenever she thought of him. She tried not to think of him. She failed constantly. By midday, Alara found herself in the fortress library, a massive chamber filled with books that stretched from floor to ceiling. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. The scent of old parchment and leather bindings wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time since arriving at Blackstone, she felt something close to peace. You're the new queen. Alara spun toward the voice. A young woman stood between 2 towering bookshelves, holding a leather-bound volume against her chest. She was perhaps a few years older than Alara, with copper hair braided in intricate patterns, and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore practical woolen leather, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her place in the world. Not yet, Alara said carefully. The ceremony is in 3 days. The woman tilted her head, studying her with open curiosity. I'm Thessa, Beta's daughter, which means I'm supposed to assess whether you're a threat or an asset to the pack. She smiled, but there was steel beneath it. So far, you're surprisingly ordinary. Alara had been called worse. I'm a debt payment, not a warrior. I don't expect to be impressive, that's honest. Thessa moved closer, circling Alara with the same predatory grace Kale had displayed. Most outsiders try to puff themselves up, make themselves seem more important than they are. You do the opposite. Why? Because I learned a long time ago that invisibility is safer than pride. Interesting survival strategy. Thessa set her book down on a nearby table, then leaned against it, arms crossed. But it won't work here. The pack doesn't respect invisibility. They respect strength. If you want to survive as queen, you'll need to show them you're more than just the king's political necessity. I don't know how to show strength. I don't have. Alara said quietly. Then learn. Thessa's expression softened slightly. Look, I know you didn't choose this. None of us choose our fates. But you're here now, and the pack is watching. Especially since, she trailed off, glancing toward the windows. Since what? Since the last human who came here didn't last 3 months before she ran screaming into the forest. Kale found her half frozen and delirious, raving about monsters and blood. Thessa's voice dropped. She never spoke coherently again. Kale sent her home with enough gold to live comfortably, but the damage was done. The pack sees human mates as weak, breakable. You'll need to prove otherwise. Alara's chest tightened. What happened to her? What did she see? The truth. Thessa met her eyes with uncomfortable directness. She saw what Kale becomes during the full moon. She saw the chains, the transformation, the absolute savagery of it. And it broke her mind. He warned me to stay away from the dungeons, then listen to him. Because seeing your mate transform into something mindless and violent, seeing the man you're supposed to love become a monster who wouldn't recognize you, Thessa shook her head. It destroys people. Even Lycans struggle with it. Humans don't stand a chance. The thread in Alara's chest pulled tighter. She thought of Kale's amber eyes, the barely restrained tension in his powerful frame. The way he'd warned her away from him with such conviction. He didn't fear for himself. He feared for her. I won't go to the dungeons, Alara said. But I won't run either. I've survived worse than monsters. Have you? Thessa pushed off the table. Because the monsters you knew wore human skin. This is different. This is primal, ancient. The beast doesn't care about your feelings or your past. It only knows hunger and violence. Then I'll make sure I'm never in its path. Thessa studied her for another long moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe you're stronger than you look. Time will tell. She moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Roken Steelclaw is coming for the ceremony. He's required to attend as an alpha. Watch him carefully. He'll smile and offer congratulations while calculating how best to use you. Kale warned me about him. Good. Because Roken doesn't just want Kale's throne. He wants to prove that human mates make Lycans weak. If you fail, if you break like the last one, he'll use it as evidence to challenge the pack laws. Thessa's expression hardened. So don't fail. She left before Alara could respond, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Alara sank into a chair, her hands trembling. She had thought invisibility would be her shield here, that playing the role of docile queen would keep her safe. But Thessa was right, invisibility wasn't an option. The pack was watching. Roken was watching. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and she wouldn't just destroy herself. She'd destroy Kale's legitimacy. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders like iron. She stood and moved to the window, staring out at the vast forest beyond. Somewhere in those trees, the previous bride had run in terror. Somewhere in this fortress, Kale prepared himself for chains and transformation. And somewhere in the shadows, enemies waited for her to fail. You look troubled. My lady. Alara turned to find Aldrich standing in the doorway, his thin frame backlit by torchlight. I'm fine, she said automatically. Forgive me. But you don't look fine. He entered the library, his movements careful and precise. You look like someone carrying more weight than they should. That's because I am. Alara gestured helplessly at the fortress around them. I'm supposed to be a queen, but I don't know how. I'm supposed to prove I'm strong, but I've spent my entire life being invisible. I'm supposed to. She stopped, swallowing hard. I'm going to fail. And when I do, it won't just be my life that falls apart. Aldrich approached slowly, his weathered face kind. May I tell you something about King Kale? Alara nodded, not trusting her voice. He was 20 when he took the throne. His father had been killed in battle, and the pack was in chaos. Roken challenged him immediately, claiming Kale was too young, too untested, too controlled by his human blood. Aldrich's eyes grew distant with memory. Everyone expected Kale to lose. He was lean and unproven. Roken was massive and brutal. But when they fought, something became clear. Kale's control wasn't weakness. It was his greatest weapon. He channeled the beast with precision, using its strength without surrendering to its madness. He won. And he's held the throne ever since through that same iron control. Why are you telling me this? Because you're like him. Aldrich smiled gently. You've survived through control, through making yourself small and unnoticed. That's not weakness, my lady. That's strategy. And if you can learn to channel that strength the way Kale channels the beast, you won't just survive here. You'll thrive. Alara wanted to believe him, but believing felt dangerous. Hope had always been the precursor to disappointment. What if I can't? She whispered. What if I'm not strong enough? Then Kale will protect you anyway, Aldrich said simply. Because despite what he tells himself, despite his attempts to remain detached, he already cares. I've served him for 10 years, my lady. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you last night. The thread in her chest pulled so hard she gasped. Her hand flew to her ribs, pressing against the sensation. Aldrich's eyes widened. You feel it. Feel what? The bond. His voice filled with wonder and concern. It's already starting. The mate pull. It usually takes weeks, sometimes months. But between you and Kale, he shook his head. It's stronger than it should be. Faster. I don't understand. What bond? The Lycans call it the moon thread. It's what connects true mates, a pull that grows stronger over time until they can barely stand to be apart. For Lycans, it's powerful. But between a Lycan and a human, Aldrich's expression grew worried. It should be weaker, slower. But if you're already feeling it this intensely, a howl echoed through the fortress, long and mournful and filled with barely contained violence. Every hair on Alar's body stood on end. The sound came from deep beneath them, from the dungeons Kale had warned her away from. What day is it? She asked, though she already knew the answer. The moon turns full tonight. Aldrich moved toward the door. Come. You need to return to your chambers. The fortress goes into lockdown during the transformation. No one enters the lower levels. No one approaches the dungeon. Not even you. Another howl, and this time Ilara felt it in her bones. The thread in her chest yanked hard, pulling her toward the sound, toward the source of that anguished cry. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. My lady. No, but Alara was already running. Alara's breath came in ragged gasps as she descended the spiral staircase, her borrowed dress tangling around her legs. Behind her, she heard Aldrich shouting, heard boots thundering as guards gave chase. But the pull in her chest was stronger than reason, stronger than fear. Something inside her screamed that Kale needed her, even if he'd explicitly warned her away. The stairs seemed endless, carved into living rock, lit only by torches spaced too far apart. The temperature dropped with each step, and the air grew thick with the scent of earth and stone and something wild. Another howl rose from below, closer now, and the thread in her chest vibrated like a plucked string. She burst through a heavy iron door into a corridor lined with cells. Most stood empty, their doors hanging open. But at the far end, torchlight flickered across massive iron bars and chains thick enough to hold a dragon. My lady, stop. A guard's hand closed around her arm. Alara wrenched free, stumbling forward. Through the bars, she could see movement, something large and restless pacing in the shadows. The chains rattled with each step, and she heard breathing, harsh and animal. Please, she whispered, not sure if she was begging the guards or herself or the thing in that cell. I need to see him. Absolutely not. The guard, a scarred man with gray threading through his beard, positioned himself between her and the cell. King's orders. No one approaches during transformation. Especially not you. I won't go inside. The thread pulled again, so hard she gasped and pressed both hands to her chest. Please, I need to see that he's all right. All right? The guard's laugh was bitter. My lady, he's chained like an animal, because that's what he becomes. There's nothing all right about it. But he stepped aside. Alara approached the cell on trembling legs. The bars were reinforced with silver. She could see the gleam of it woven through the iron and etched with symbols she didn't recognize. Protection wards, perhaps. Or containment spells. The chains disappeared into the darkness, anchored to the walls with bolts as thick as her wrist. Kale? Her voice came out barely louder than a breath. The pacing stopped. Silence stretched, broken only by the distant drip of water and her own thundering heart. Then slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Alar's breath caught. He was still mostly human, broad shoulders, powerful frame, those amber eyes gleaming in the torchlight. But his features had shifted, become more angular, more predatory. His hands ended in claws that scraped against the stone floor. His teeth, when he snarled, were too sharp to be human. And the way he moved was pure animal grace, all coiled power and barely restrained violence. The chains rattled as he approached the bars. He stopped just beyond arm's reach, his chest heaving with each breath. Sweat gleamed on his skin, and she could see the muscles beneath writhing as if something fought to tear free. I told you. His voice was rougher, deeper, barely recognizable. To stay away. I know. Alara's hands trembled, but she didn't step back. I'm sorry. I couldn't. Why? The word came out as a growl. Why would you come here? Why would you? He stopped, his entire body going rigid. You feel it. The bond. It wasn't a question. She nodded anyway, Kale's eyes closed, and his jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. No, no. That's not supposed to happen this fast. Not with a human. What does it mean? It means he slammed his clawed fist against the wall, leaving deep gouges in the stone. You need to leave, now, before the transformation completes. Before the beast smells you and decides you're prey. You won't hurt me. You don't know that. His shout echoed through the dungeon, raw and desperate. I won't know you, Alara. When the change finishes, when the moon takes full hold, I'll be nothing but instinct and hunger. The beast doesn't recognize mates or bonds or anything civilized. It only knows that you're small and soft and fragile. And it will tear you apart. The thread in her chest pulled tighter, and suddenly she understood. The bond wasn't just connecting her to Kale, it was connecting her to the beast. And the beast felt it too, that impossible, undeniable pull toward her. How long? She asked quietly. How long until the transformation completes? Minutes. His breathing was coming faster now, more ragged. Alara, please. If you care at all about your life, you'll. He stopped mid-sentence, his back arching as a shudder ran through him. The guard grabbed her arm again. We need to go, now. But Alara couldn't move, because Kale had dropped to his knees, the chains rattling as he convulsed. She watched in frozen horror as his body twisted, bones cracking and reforming. Dark fur rippled across his skin, his face elongated, became more muzzle than mouth. His hands splayed against the stone floor, fingers thickening into massive paws tipped with claws like daggers. The transformation took less than a minute. When it finished, what rose from the floor wasn't Kale anymore. It was a creature from nightmares, larger than any natural wolf, with a body that blended human and animal into something altogether other. It stood onto legs, but moved with the fluid grace of a predator. Its eyes still amber, still somehow familiar, fixed on her with an intelligence that was both more and less than human. The beast opened its jaws and released a sound, between a howl and a roar that shook the very stones. Then it lunged. The chains caught it mid-leap, yanking it back with brutal force. The beast snarled and thrashed, claws raking the air inches from the bars. The silver-reinforced iron held, but barely. The entire cell shook with the violence of its rage. Alara should have run. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to flee. But she couldn't, because beneath the rage and violence, she felt something else. Through the bond pain, the beast wasn't just angry. It was suffering. The chains hurt him, she said, barely aware she'd spoken aloud. They have to, the guard said grimly. Silver burns, Lycans. It's the only thing that holds them. The pain keeps him from fully surrendering to the rage. That's barbaric. That's survival. For him and for us. The beast lunged again, and again the chains yanked it back. This time she saw the burns on its wrists, where the silver lace manacles cut into flesh. Smoke rose from the wounds, and the scent of burned meat filled the air. The thread in Alara's chest twisted with agony that wasn't entirely hers. She pressed both hands to her ribs, gasping. Through the bond, she felt everything: the pain, the rage, the mindless hunger. But underneath it all, buried deep, she felt something else: recognition. The beast knew her. Not consciously, perhaps, but some part of it, some instinct deeper than thought, recognized her presence. And it was fighting itself, fighting the chains, fighting the silver burns, trying desperately to reach her. He's not attacking me, Alara whispered. He's trying to get to me. That's the same thing, my lady. No, it's not. She took a step closer to the bars. The guard's hand clamped down on her shoulder. Absolutely not. I won't let you get yourself killed. I'm not going to die. She didn't know how she knew, but the certainty filled her bones. The bond won't let him hurt me. The bond is new and tested. You're betting your life on something you don't understand. He was right. She knew he was right. But the thread in her chest pulled with such force that refusing felt like tearing herself apart. And more than that, she couldn't stand watching Kale suffer. Human or beast, he was in agony. And she had spent her entire life invisible to other people's pain. She wouldn't be invisible to his. Let me try, she said. Just let me. The beast's howl cut her off. But this time it sounded different. Less rage, more anguish. It had stopped lunging, and now stood rigid against its chains, sides heaving. Its amber eyes locked onto hers, and she saw something flicker in them, a flash of awareness, of desperate pleading. Help me. The words didn't come from its mouth. They echoed through the bond, raw and primal. Alara's hands moved to the cell door before she realized what she was doing. The guard grabbed her, but she shook him off with surprising strength. "If you go in there, you die," he said flatly. "And when the king wakes up and realizes what he did, it'll destroy him. Is that what you want?" She looked at the beast at Kale and made her choice. "Open the door." "No, that's an order." She turned to face him, drawing on reserves of authority she didn't know she possessed. "I am your future queen. Open the door." The guard's expression twisted with conflict. "The king will have my head for this. He'll have mine first." "Open it." For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, the guard retrieved a massive iron key from his belt. His hands shook as he fitted it into the lock. "Stay outside the chain reach," he said, his voice rough. "At least give yourself a chance." The door swung open. With a groan of protest, Alara stepped into the cell. The beast's growl vibrated through Alara's bones as she crossed the threshold into the cell. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the thread in her chest pulled her forward with inexorable force. The chains rattled as the creature shifted its weight, claws scraping against stone. She stopped just beyond the reach of those massive paws, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. The beast towered over her 7 feet of muscle and fur and barely contained violence. Up close, she could see the silver burns blistering its wrists, the way its entire body trembled with restraint. "Kale," she whispered. "I know you can hear me. I know you're in there." The beast's amber eyes fixed on her with predatory focus. Its lips peeled back from fangs as long as her fingers. A line of saliva dripped from its jaw. It looked like every nightmare she'd ever had made flesh, but through the bond, she felt the war raging inside it. Part animal hunger, part desperate recognition. The beast wanted to lunge, to tear, to claim, but something deeper held it back, fighting the instinct with everything it had. "I'm not afraid of you," Alara said, though her trembling hands told a different truth. She forced them, still, clasping them in front of her. "You warned me away because you thought you'd hurt me. But you won't. I know you won't." The beast took one step toward her. The chains pulled taut, silver-laced iron cutting deeper into its flesh. Smoke rose from the burns, and the scent made Alara's stomach turn. Through the bond, pain flared white-hot. She moved without thinking, stepping closer. Behind her, the guard cursed, but she ignored him. All her focus was on those amber eyes, on the intelligence flickering behind the animal rage. "The chains are hurting you," she said softly. "Fighting them only makes it worse." Another step. She was close enough now to feel the heat radiating from its body, to see the rapid rise and fall of its massive chest. The beast went perfectly still, as if movement might shatter whatever fragile control it maintained. "That's it," Alara breathed. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm just," her voice caught. "I just want to help." The beast's head tilted slightly, almost canine in its curiosity. Its nostrils flared, sending her. Then, slowly, so slowly she almost missed it, the tension in its frame eased. Just a fraction. Just enough. Alara lifted her hand, palm out. "May I?" The beast stared at her hand like it was a weapon. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then it made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, and lowered its massive head. Her fingers touched fur. The bond exploded between them like a dam breaking. Sensation flooded Alara's mind, the beast's pain, its confusion, its desperate need to both protect and possess her. But underneath the animal instincts, she felt him, Kale, still there, still fighting, still aware despite the transformation. The beast shuddered under her touch, and she felt its muscles begin to relax. The rigid tension that had held it like a bowstring slowly unwound. It sank to its haunches, bringing its enormous head level with hers. Alara's other hand joined the first, stroking through thick fur. "There you are," she murmured. "I can feel you, Kale. You're still in there." Behind her, she heard the guard's stunned intake of breath, but she didn't turn around. All her attention was on the creature before her, on the way it leaned into her touch like a starving man accepting bread. "The pain from the chains," she said quietly. "Can you pull away from them? Just a little? Give yourself some slack?" The beast's eyes closed. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, with careful precision, it shifted backward. The chains loosened, the silver pulling away from burned flesh. The relief that flooded through the bond nearly dropped Alara to her knees. "Good," she breathed. "That's good." The beast opened its eyes and looked at her with such raw vulnerability that her throat tightened. This was Kale, stripped of all his control and restraint, reduced to pure instinct and need. And what it needed, more than violence or dominance, was connection. She understood that need. She'd spent 6 years invisible, untouched, alone. Part of her had forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone. To be seen. You're not a monster, she told him, told the beast, told herself. You're just hurt, and alone. And so tired of fighting. The beast made that sound again, half whine, half growl, and pressed its muzzle against her hands. The gesture was almost pleading. Alara sank to her knees on the cold stone floor, and the beast immediately lowered itself to lie beside her. It was massive, even lying down, but it tucked itself close, careful not to touch her with its claws. Only its head rested in her lap, heavy and warm, and trembling with exhaustion. She stroked its fur, following the bond to find the places that ached most. Behind its ears, along its scarred shoulders, down its spine, where the transformation had twisted bone and muscle. Every touch seemed to ease some invisible pain, and with each easing, the beast's breathing slowed. My lady, the guard's voice came from the doorway, thick with disbelief. I've served the king for 15 years. I've seen 3 transformations a year for all that time. And I've never. He stopped, shaking his head. This isn't supposed to be possible. Why not? Alara didn't look up from the beast in her lap, because the transformation strips away everything civilized. The beast is pure id, pure instinct. It doesn't recognize people or bonds or love. It only knows hunger and violence. He gestured helplessly at the scene before him. But he's not violent with you. He's not even aggressive. He's present. Alara finished. He's aware. The bond is keeping him tethered. That shouldn't work with someone who isn't Lycan. The moon thread between Lycan mates is powerful. But between Lycan and human, the guard trailed off. Clearly out of his depth, Alara looked down at the beast's face, so inhuman and yet so achingly familiar. Through the bond, she felt Kale's consciousness hovering at the edge, not in control, but aware, witnessing, understanding what was happening, even if he couldn't stop it. Maybe, she said softly. The bond doesn't care. What should be possible? The beast's eyes drifted closed. Its breathing deepened, evened out. For the first time since the transformation, it seemed peaceful. He's sleeping, the guard said, wonder evident in his voice. I've never seen the beast sleep during the full moon. It usually rages until dawn. He's exhausted. Alara continued, stroking the thick fur. Fighting yourself all night. Every month. She shook her head. No one should have to live like this. It's the curse of being Lycan. The price of power. That doesn't make it right. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside the cell, Alara could hear other guards gathering, drawn by the impossible sight. Whispers rippled through the dungeon. The human queen had entered the beast's cage and survived. More than survived, she'd gentled the monster. But Alara didn't feel heroic. She felt angry. Angry at a world that forced Kale to chain himself like an animal. Angry at pack laws that demanded mates and legitimacy but offered no support or understanding. Angry at herself for all the years she'd made herself invisible instead of fighting back. When dawn comes, she said quietly, and he transforms back, he won't remember any of this clearly. The guard interrupted. The beast's memories are fragmented, dreamlike. He'll know something happened, but not what. Tell him, Alara said firmly. Tell him exactly what happened. Tell him I came to the dungeons despite his warnings. Tell him the beast responded to me. Tell him. Her voice caught. Tell him he's not as alone as he thinks. The guard nodded slowly. You should leave before dawn, my lady. The transformation back is almost as violent as the change itself. And he'll be vulnerable, disoriented. He won't want you to see him like that. I don't care what he wants. The words surprised her, but she meant them. I'm tired of men deciding what's best for me without asking. I'm staying. My lady, that's an order. She gentled her tone. Please, I need to stay. The guard studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You're more stubborn than you look. I've had a lot of practice being invisible. Stubbornness is how I survived. He left to report to Aldrich, leaving Alara alone with the sleeping beast. The other guards remained outside the cell, but at a respectful distance. She could feel their eyes on her, feel their judgment and wonder in equal measure. Let them watch. For once in her life, being visible didn't feel like a weakness. Hours passed. The torches burned low. Outside the dungeon windows, she could see the moon beginning to sink toward the horizon. Dawn approached. The beast stirred in her lap, and through the bond, she felt Kale rising toward consciousness. The transformation would reverse soon. She should leave, give him privacy and dignity. But she'd meant what she said. She was done letting men make decisions for her. The beast's eyes opened, still amber, still inhuman, but more aware now. It lifted its head from her lap and stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then, with careful deliberation, it touched its muzzle to her hand. Just once, a gesture that felt like gratitude, like reverence, like promise. The first rays of dawn struck through the window. The beast threw its head back and howled, not rage this time, but something that sounded almost like grief. Its body convulsed, bones cracking and reforming in reverse. Alara looked away, giving him what privacy she could, but she didn't leave. When the sounds finally stopped, she turned back. Kale knelt on the stone floor, naked and trembling, silver burns marking his wrists like grotesque bracelets. Sweat gleamed on his skin, and his dark hair hung in a tangled curtain around his face. He looked up at her with those amber eyes, human now, but no less wild, and his expression crumbled. "You came," he whispered, his voice raw. "Despite everything I said, you came." "Yes," Alara said simply. "Why?" She reached out and touched his face, her palm against his rough jaw. "Because you're not as monstrous as you think you are, Kale Warner. And I'm not as fragile as you fear." He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, and she felt his whole body shaking with emotion. He'd held back too long. When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I could have killed you," he said, "but you didn't." "I could have, but you didn't." She moved closer, kneeling beside him, heedless of propriety or scandal. "The beast knew me, Kale. It felt the bond, and it chose not to hurt me. That was you. Even in that form, you protected me. You don't understand what you did." His voice broke. "What you risked." What She stopped his words with her hand over his mouth. "I understand perfectly. I risked everything to prove that you're not alone anymore. That you don't have to chain yourself in darkness and suffer through every moon without comfort or care." She lowered her hand, but held his gaze. "I'm going to be your wife in 2 days. That means something to me. Even if it's political. Even if it's just a formality. You're mine to care for now. And I don't abandon what's mine." Kale stared at her like she'd spoken in a language he'd forgotten existed. Then slowly, he reached up and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough with scars, his fingers trembling. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "That's not your decision to make." She smiled, small but genuine. "Besides, I'm a debt payment, remember? You're stuck with me." He laughed, a broken, desperate sound, and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, wrapping herself around him, despite his nakedness, despite the guards watching, despite every rule of propriety she'd ever known. He buried his face in her hair and held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world, and maybe she was. The fortress buzzed with gossip by midday. Alara sat in the queen's solar, her solar now technically, though she'd barely spent any time in it, listening to servants whisper as they prepared her wedding dress. The human queen had entered the beast's cage. The monster had submitted to her touch. The bond was stronger than anyone predicted. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt exposed. "You've made quite the impression," Thessa said from the doorway. The beta's daughter entered with her usual confident stride, but her expression was thoughtful rather than challenging. "The pack is talking about nothing else. I didn't do it for an audience," Alara said quietly, watching the seamstress's work. The dress was beautiful midnight blue like the one she'd worn to meet Kale, but this one was embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like moonlight on water. "No, but you've got one anyway." Thessa settled into a chair across from her. "Roken's steel glow arrived this morning. He's asking questions. Lots of them. About you, about the bond, about last night." Alara's hand stilled in her lap. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he's looking for weaknesses to exploit." Thessa's gray eyes narrowed. "He's claiming that what happened last night proves human mates are dangerous. That the bond is making Kale vulnerable, distracted. That a true alpha wouldn't need a mate to control his beast. That's ridiculous. The bond didn't make him vulnerable, it made him stronger." "That's not how Roken is spinning it." Thessa leaned forward. "He's saying you manipulated Kale's beast form, that you used some kind of human magic or trickery. He's suggesting that if a weak human girl can control the Lycan King during his transformation, then Kale isn't fit to lead." Anger flared hot in Alara's chest. "I didn't control anything. She stopped, struggling to find words for something she barely understood herself. The beast was in pain. I helped ease it. That's all. That's not all, and you know it. Thessa's expression was serious. What happened last night was unprecedented. The beast responding to a human mate, lying peacefully in your lap. That kind of connection takes decades to build between Lycan mates. Between human and Lycan, it should be impossible. Then why, I don't know. Thessa shook her head. Maybe you'd are true mates in a way that transcends species. Maybe the bond is compensating for your human fragility by strengthening the connection. Or maybe, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Maybe you're not as human as everyone thinks. Alara stared at her. What? I'm just saying, you survived something that broke the last human who tried. You feel the mate bond stronger and faster than you should. And the beast recognized you instantly, when it shouldn't recognize anything. Thessa spread her hands. Either you're the most exceptional human who's ever lived, or there's something else going on. I'm nobody. Just a debt collector's daughter. Maybe. Or maybe your father had secrets you don't know about. Thessa stood, pacing to the window. Regardless, Roken is going to use last night against you both. He'll twist it into evidence of weakness, of a natural influence, of anything that supports his challenge. When does he challenge? Traditionally, rival alphas wait until after the mating ceremony. Challenging before the bond is complete is considered dishonorable. Thessa's mouth tightened. But Roken isn't known for his honor. If he thinks he has an advantage, he'll strike early. Alar's mind raced. She had 2 days until the ceremony. 2 days to prepare for a challenge she didn't understand, to defend a position she'd never wanted, to protect a man who'd tried to push her away for her own safety. I need to see Kale, she said. He's been in council meetings all morning. Damage control. Thessa returned to her chair. Aldrich said he'd barely slept, just went straight from the dungeons to the throne room to address the pack's concerns. Of course he had. Because Kale never allowed himself weakness, never let anyone see him as anything less than perfectly controlled. The thought of him pushing himself to exhaustion after the agony of transformation made Alara's chest ache. When will he be free? Not until evening. Which is why I'm here. Thessa's expression grew calculating. Roken is hosting a pre-ceremony feast tonight in the Great Hall. Technically, it's meant to honor the upcoming union, but really, it's an opportunity for him to assess you in public. Kale can't refuse without appearing weak, and you can't stay away without confirming Roken's claims that you're unfit. So I walk into a trap, essentially. Yes. Thessa smiled without humor. Welcome to pack politics. It's all traps and power plays and pretending to be civil while plotting each other's destruction. I don't know how to navigate that. I've spent my life invisible. Then it's time to learn visibility. Thessa stood and offered her hand. Come, if you're going to survive tonight, you need to understand what you're walking into. Alara took her hand and let Thessa pull her to her feet. The seamstresses bowed and slipped away, leaving them alone in the solar. First lesson, Thessa said. Roken will try to bait you. He'll make comments about your humanity, your unsuitability, your lack of status. Do not rise to it. Every emotional reaction is a victory for him. I can stay calm. Second lesson. He'll ask seemingly innocent questions designed to make you reveal information about Kale, his habits, his weaknesses, the state of your bond. Answer only in generalities. Give nothing useful. Understood. Third lesson, and this is the most important one. Thessa's expression turned fierce. Do not, under any circumstances, show weakness or fear in front of the pack. They respect strength above all else. If you hesitate, if you falter, if you show even a moment of uncertainty, they'll write you off as unworthy. And once you lose the pack's respect, you'll never get it back. Alara thought of the 6 years she'd spent making herself small, swallowing pride, accepting cruelty without complaint. All of it had been about survival. But survival here required the opposite, required her to be visible, strong, unflinching. I don't know how to be strong, she admitted quietly. Yes, you do. Thessa gripped her shoulders. You walked into the beast's cage knowing you might die. You faced down the thing that sent another woman screaming into madness. That's not weakness, Alara. That's courage most Lycans don't possess. That was different. That was instinct? Need? Love? Thessa smiled slightly. It's all the same. You're stronger than you think. You just need to let everyone else see it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Aldrich entered, his expression grave. My lady, King Kale requests your presence in the throne room. Alara's pulse jumped. Now, immediately. Aldrich glanced between her and Thessa. Roken has made a formal petition to address the pack. The king wants you there when it happens. Thessa cursed under her breath. He's moving faster than I expected. What does he want? Elara asked, though she suspected she already knew. To challenge the validity of your upcoming bond. Aldrich's voice was carefully neutral. He's claiming that last night's events prove you're using unnatural means to influence the king. He wants the pack to vote on whether the ceremony should proceed. The thread in Alar's chest twisted painfully. If the pack voted against the bond, Kale would lose legitimacy. He'd be vulnerable to challenge. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed would crumble. Because of her, take me to him, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. My lady, you should know. Aldrich hesitated. Roken has brought witnesses. People from your village. They'll testify about your father's dealings, your status, my worthlessness, Alara finished. Yes, I'm aware of what they'll say. She'd spent 18 years hearing it. One more performance wouldn't kill her, but as she followed Aldrich through the fortress corridors, Thessa at her side, she felt the weight of what was coming. Roken wouldn't just question her bond with Kale. He'd strip away every defense she'd built, expose every vulnerability, drag her past into the light, and she'd have to stand there and take it without flinching. The throne room doors loomed ahead, already open. She could hear voices inside, Kale's deep and commanding, another man's smooth and mocking. The pack had assembled, their presence a physical pressure in the air. Remember, Thessa whispered, as they reached the threshold. Stay calm. Show no fear. You're the future queen. Act like it. Alara nodded and stepped into the room. Every eye turned to her. She felt their assessment like weight, like judgment. At the far end of the hall, Kale sat on his throne, and even from a distance she could see the tension in his frame. To his left stood a man she'd never seen before, tall, powerfully built, with silvered hair and eyes like ice. Roken Steelclaw. He watched her approach with the expression of a predator sizing up prey. She walked down the center aisle with her spine straight and her chin lifted, channeling every ounce of dignity she possessed. The borrowed dress rustled around her legs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face blank, her steps even. Kale's eyes found hers, and she felt the bond flare between them, reassurance, pride, barely restrained fury at what she was about to endure. She held his gaze for a moment, letting him see that she wasn't afraid, even if that was a lie. She reached the dais and curtsied formally. First to Kale, then because protocols demanded it to Roken as a visiting alpha. Roken's smile was all teeth. Lady Alara, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. How kind of you to join us. We were just discussing your remarkable display last night. It wasn't a display, Alara said calmly. It was simple compassion. Compassion? Roken tasted the word like it was foreign. How very human. Tell me, do you often enter dangerous situations armed with nothing but compassion? When the situation calls for it, yes. How brave. His tone said the opposite. Or perhaps how foolish. After all, compassion doesn't stop claws. It doesn't prevent teeth from tearing flesh. What do you think saved you, Lady Alara? Your gentle heart, or the fact that the beast was too controlled by your influence to act on its instincts? The trap was obvious. If she claimed the bond saved her, she proved his point about a natural influence. If she claimed Kale's control saved her, she diminished what they'd shared. She chose a third option. What saved me, she said clearly, was the fact that King Kale, even in his most primal form, is a better man than most who wear human skin their whole lives. The silence that followed was absolute. Kale's expression remained carefully neutral, but she felt his approval through the bond. Roken's smile faded. Pretty words, he said, but words don't change facts. And the facts are these: you are human, weak, and entirely unsuited to be a Lycan queen. Your presence makes the king vulnerable. Your bond is unnatural. And if the pack values strength, true strength, they'll vote to dissolve this arrangement before it compromises us all. He turned to address the assembled Lycans. I call for a formal vote. Should this ceremony proceed, or should we acknowledge what we all know, that human mates weaken alphas and threaten pack stability? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Alara felt the weight of their judgment, their doubt, but she also felt something else: curiosity. Respect maybe, for her defiance. Kale rose from his throne, and the murmurs died instantly. You want to question my choice of mate, he said, his voice cutting through the hall like a blade. Fine, question away. But understand this: Alara Thorne walked into the beast's cage when seasoned warriors refused to approach. She calmed a transformation that's brought me nothing but agony for 10 years. She faced the most dangerous version of myself without flinching. If that's weakness, Roken, then I'll take it over your kind of strength any day. The thread in Alara's chest blazed so hot she gasped. Kale's eyes met hers, and in them she saw everything he couldn't say in front of the pack: admiration, gratitude, something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Roken's expression darkened. The king is clearly compromised. He's already choosing this human over pack welfare. That alone proves my point. Then challenge me, Kale said softly. Stop hiding behind politics and petitions. If you think I'm weak, if you think you're strong enough to take my throne, then challenge me properly. Here, now, let the pack see which of us is truly fit to lead. The hall erupted in shouts and cheers. This was what they'd come for, not a debate, but a fight. A chance to see dominance proven with tooth and claw. But Roken smiled, and the expression turned Alara's blood cold. I accept your challenge, he said. But not here, not now. The ceremony is in 2 days. Let's allow the bond to complete first. Then I'll challenge. And when I win, when I prove that your human mate has made you weak, I'll take not just your throne, but everything you hold dear. His eyes cut to Alara, and the threat was clear. Kale snarled. But Roken was already turning away, addressing the pack. 2 days, my friends. Watch them closely. See if the bond strengthens your king or destroys him. Then you'll know who deserves to lead. He strode from the hall, his supporters following. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Alara and Kale standing on the dais with the weight of the challenge hanging between them. When they were finally alone, Kale descended the steps and pulled her into his arms without hesitation. I'm sorry, he said roughly. I should have protected you from that. You can't protect me from everything. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling his heart thunder against her cheek. This is my fight too. No, it's my challenge. My throne. And I'm going to be your queen. She pulled back to look at him. That means I fight beside you, not behind you. Kale stared at her with an expression that made the bond sing. You're remarkable. I'm terrified. That too. He touched her face gently. But you're handling it better than anyone else would. Better than I am. Then we'll be terrified together. She managed a smile. 2 days until the ceremony. What happens after? Roken challenges. We fight. I win. Kale's expression hardened. And if anything goes wrong, if I'm injured or weakened, you run. You get as far from here as possible. No, Alara, no, she repeated firmly. I'm done running. I'm done hiding. Whatever happens, we face it together. He looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he kissed her forehead, his lips gentle against her skin. You're going to be the death of me, he murmured, or your salvation, she whispered back. The bond hummed between them, growing stronger by the hour. In 2 days, they'd be formally mated, and then Roken would try to tear everything apart. Alara held Kale tighter and prayed that what they'd built would be strong enough to survive what was coming. The morning of the ceremony dawned gray and cold. Alara stood at her window, watching mist curl through the forest below. In a few hours, she would become queen of the Northern Reach, mate to the Lycan King, bound by laws and magic she still barely understood. The dress hung behind her, midnight blue and silver, beautiful enough to hurt. She should have felt joy, or at least acceptance. Instead, she felt the weight of Roken's challenge pressing down on her shoulders like stone. You're going to wear a path in the floor if you keep pacing. Thessa's voice came from the doorway. The beta's daughter entered carrying a tray of food that Alara knew she wouldn't touch. Nervous? Would you believe me if I said no? Not even a little. Thessa set the tray down and joined her at the window. For what it's worth, you look appropriately terrified for someone about to make a life-altering commitment while a rival alpha circles like a vulture. Alara huffed a laugh despite herself. Thank you for that comforting assessment. Comfort is overrated. What you need is clarity. Thessa's expression turned serious. Tonight after the ceremony, the bond will complete. It'll be permanent, unbreakable. And tomorrow, Roken challenges. Are you ready for what that means? I don't think I'll ever be ready. Good answer. Anyone who says they're ready to watch their mate fight to the death is either lying or psychotic. Thessa squeezed her shoulder. But you'll survive it. Because you're stronger than you look. And Kale is better than Roken gives him credit for. What if he's not? The words spilled out before Alara could stop them. What if the bond has made him vulnerable? What if Roken is right, and I've weakened him instead of strengthening him? Then we're all dead, so it won't matter. At Alara's horrified expression, Thessa grinned. Sorry, Lycan humor. What I mean is stop borrowing trouble. Kale has held this throne for 10 years against multiple challenges. He's not suddenly going to lose because he found someone worth protecting. That's not reassuring. Again, comfort is overrated. That's a move toward the door. I'll send the attendants in to help you dress. Try to eat something. And Alara, she paused at the threshold. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that you walked into the beast's cage and survived. You're tougher than anyone expected, including yourself. She left before Alara could respond. The next hour passed in a blur of servants and preparations. Alara was bathed, dressed, her hair woven with silver threads that caught the dim light. When she finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the young woman staring back. She looked like a queen, strong, regal, mysterious. The opposite of everything she'd spent her life being. Beautiful, Aldrich said from the doorway, making her jump. The king is waiting in the great hall. Are you ready? No, yes. He offered his arm, and she took it gratefully. They walked through the fortress in silence, her hand trembling on his sleeve. The corridors seemed longer than before, the torchlight casting strange shadows. By the time they reached the great hall's entrance, her heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. The doors opened, the hall had been transformed. Torches blazed along every wall, casting golden light across the assembled pack. Hundreds of Lycans stood in formal rows, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to outright hostility. At the far end, on the dais, Kale waited. He wore black leather and wool, silver embroidery at the collar and cuffs that matched the thread in her dress. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp angles of his face, those amber eyes that seemed to glow even without transformation. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression: wonder, possession, reverence. The bond flared between them, so strong it nearly dropped her to her knees. Aldrich steadied her. Easy. The intensity will pass once the ceremony completes. Will it? She whispered. Probably not. But you'll learn to manage it. He guided her down the aisle. Every step felt monumental, like crossing from one life into another. Faces blurred past. She was vaguely aware of Roken standing to the side, watching with cold calculation. But her focus stayed on Kale. On the way, he tracked her approach like she was the only thing in the room. She reached the dais and climbed the steps alone. Aldrich had released her at the base, stepping back into the crowd. Now it was just her and Kale, facing each other beneath the weight of pack witness. An elderly woman stepped forward, tall, weathered, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many transformations. The pack elder, Alara realized. The one who would bind them. We gather to witness the bonding of Alpha and Mate, the elder said, her voice carrying through the hall. King Kale Vorner of House Blackstone, and Lady Alara Thorne, once of Grey Hollow. Do you come here of your own will? Yes, Kale said firmly. Alara's voice caught. Every doubt, every fear crashed over her at once. She was nobody. She had nothing to offer him. How could she stand beside the Lycan King and pretend she belonged? Then Kale's hand found hers. His fingers threaded through hers, warm and solid, and through the bond she felt his certainty. He wanted this, wanted her, not because of politics or pack laws, but because of who she was, the woman who'd walked into the beast's cage without flinching. Yes, she said clearly. I come willingly. The elder nodded and produced a silver knife, its blade etched with symbols Alara didn't recognize. The bond requires blood and oath. You will each make your vow and seal it with your essence. Are you prepared? Kale turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. His amber eyes searched hers, asking a silent question. She nodded. He spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. I, Kale Vorner, King of the Northern Reach, Alpha of House Blackstone, take you, Alara Thorne, as my mate. I vow to protect you with my life, to stand beside you against all threats, to honor the bond between us above all other ties. From this moment until death parts us, you are mine and I am yours. The elder handed him the knife. He drew it across his palm without hesitation, blood welling bright and red. Then he offered the blade to Alara. Her hands shook as she took it. The metal was cold, impossibly sharp. She looked at Kale, at the certainty in his expression, and found her courage. I, Alara Thorne, daughter of Marcus, take you, Kale Vorner, as my mate. Her voice strengthened as she spoke. I vow to stand beside you in darkness and light, to face your beasts without fear, to be your strength when you falter, and your shelter when you rage. From this moment until death parts us, you are mine and I am yours. She drew the blade across her palm. Pain flared bright and sharp, but she didn't flinch. Blood pooled in her hand, mixing with the silver from the knife. The elder took their bleeding palms and pressed them together. Where their blood touched, light flared brilliant, impossible, filling the hall with silver radiance. Alara gasped as power surged through her. The bond snapping into place with physical force. She felt Kale truly felt him, not just through some distant emotional connection, but as if part of his soul had merged with hers. His strength, his control, his barely contained rage at the world that forced him to hide what he was. But underneath it all, deeper than the anger or fear, she felt love. Fierce, protective, absolute. The light faded. Alara swayed, and Kale's free arm wrapped around her waist, holding her steady. "It is done," the elder proclaimed. "By blood and oath and moon's witness, the bond is complete. King Kale and Queen Alara, mated and bound. May the pack prosper under your joined rule." The hall erupted in howls, some celebratory, some challenging, all primal. Through the noise, Alara heard Roken's voice. "A beautiful ceremony. Such a shame it won't last." The crowd parted as the rival alpha stepped forward. He looked exactly as he had 2 days ago, cold, confident, lethal. But now there was something else in his expression. Satisfaction. "King Kale," he said formally. "I, Roken Steelclaw, alpha of the Iron Ridge Pack, formally challenge your right to rule. Tomorrow at dawn, we settle this as alphas should, tooth and claw, until one of us falls." Kale's arm tightened around Alara's waist. Through the bond, she felt his fury, barely restrained. But his voice remained calm. "I accept your challenge, Roken. Dawn tomorrow, in the combat circle. May the strongest alpha prevail." "Oh, he will." Roken's smile was all predator. "I look forward to showing your new queen what real strength looks like." He turned and walked from the hall, his supporters following. The remaining pack members watched Kale and Alara with expressions ranging from pity to anticipation. They wanted a show. They wanted blood. When the hall finally emptied, leaving them alone on the dais, Kale pulled Alara into his arms properly. "I'm sorry," he said against her hair. "This isn't how today should have ended. It's not over yet." She pulled back to look at him. "We still have tonight. And tomorrow, you'll win. You sound certain." "I am." She touched his face, feeling the rough stubble, the tension in his jaw. "Because you're fighting for more than a throne now. You're fighting for us. For what we built in that dungeon cell. For the future we're supposed to have." Kale closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. You're stuck with me now. The bond is complete." She managed a smile. "Besides, I have nowhere else to go." He laughed, rough and tired but genuine. "Come, let's get you out of this formal dress and somewhere private. I want to spend our bonding night with my mate, not my queen." She let him lead her from the hall, through the fortress to his personal chambers. They were larger than hers, darker, filled with the scent of pine and smoke that was purely Kale. A fire crackled in the hearth. The bed looked massive and inviting, but neither of them moved toward it. Instead, Kale pulled her to sit beside him on the fur rug before the fire. He wrapped a blanket around them both, and they sat in comfortable silence, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. "I can feel you," she said softly. "Not just emotions, everything. Your thoughts, your fears, your I know." His hand traced patterns on her arm. "I feel you too. Your courage, your stubbornness, the way you doubt yourself even when you shouldn't. Is it always like this? So intense?" "For Lycans, the bond settles over time. Becomes background noise unless we focus on it." He paused. "But I've never heard of a bond this strong between Lycan and human." "What we have," he shook his head. "It's unprecedented. Good or bad, I don't know yet." His arms tightened around her. "But I know I'm grateful for it. For you. Even if this is the last night we have together." "Don't say that. Tomorrow, Roken, tomorrow, you'll win." She shifted to face him directly. "Because you're not fighting alone anymore. I'll be there in the circle, giving you my strength through the bond. We're mated now, Kale. That means something." He stared at her with such intensity that she felt it in her bones. Then slowly, he kissed her. Not with passion or desperation, but with reverence. Like she was something precious he'd been waiting his whole life to find. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "know that you changed everything. You walked into my darkness and brought light. You tamed the beast and gave me hope. And if I fall, you won't." "If I fall," he continued firmly, You take the gold from my vaults and you run. You go somewhere Roken can't reach, and you build a life. Promise me. No, Alara said no. She met his amber eyes without flinching. I'm your mate now, your queen. Where you go, I go. Victory or death, we face it together. You're impossible. You're stubborn. We're both fools, he murmured, pulling her close again. They stayed like that through the night, wrapped in each other's arms, the bond humming between them. Neither slept. Both knew that dawn approached too quickly, bringing with it a challenge that would decide everything. But for now, in the firelight, they had each other. And that would have to be enough. Dawn broke cold and merciless. Alara stood at the edge of the combat circle, her hands clenched so tightly her nails drew blood. The clearing had been prepared overnight, a perfect ring of packed earth 30 feet across, ringed with torches that still burned against the gray morning light. The entire pack had assembled, forming a living wall around the circle. Their faces showed anticipation, bloodlust, judgment. Kale stood at the center, stripped to the waist, despite the cold. His muscled torso bore dozens of scars, evidence of battles won and survived. He rolled his shoulders, testing his flexibility, his expression distant and focused. Through the bond, Alara felt his calm certainty. He'd done this before. He would do it again. But she also felt his fear, not for himself, but for her. For what would happen if he lost? Across the circle, Roken entered. He was larger than Kale, broader through the shoulders and chest, covered in ritualistic scars that marked him as a veteran of countless fights. He looked at Kale with contempt, then at Alara with something darker. Your mate looks terrified, Kale, he called, his voice carrying. Shall we postpone? Give her time to accept that. She'll be widowed before noon? My mate, Kale said evenly, has more courage than you've demonstrated in your entire life. Face me, Roken. Let's finish this. The pack elder stepped between them, her weathered face grave. This is a challenge for dominance. You will fight until one submits or falls. No interference, no mercy, no quarter. She looked between them. May the strongest alpha prevail. She stepped back, leaving them alone in the circle. For a moment, neither moved. They circled each other slowly, predators assessing prey. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the bond, she felt Kale's focus narrow to a single point: survive, win, protect. Roken lunged first. The impact when they collided was tremendous. The sound of flesh hitting flesh echoing through the clearing. Kale rolled with the momentum, using Roken's mass against him, throwing the larger man off balance. But Roken recovered quickly, his clawed hand raking across Kale's ribs. Blood welled bright and red. Alara gasped, and through the bond she felt Kale's pain like it was her own. But she also felt his grim satisfaction. First blood was his to give. They broke apart, circling again. Roken's eyes had begun to shift, amber bleeding into them. The beast was rising, even without the full moon's influence. Kale's own eyes gleamed, but his transformation remained controlled, measured, still hiding behind your precious control, Roken taunted. Still too afraid to let the beast free. That's what makes you weak, Kale. You fight half changed, half committed. While he shifted fully, bones cracking and reforming in seconds. Where a man had stood, now crouched a massive wolf creature, easily 7 feet tall, fur silver as moonlight, teeth like daggers. The pack howled their approval. This was what they'd come to see: pure Lycan dominance, unrestrained and savage. Kale remained human, or mostly so. Only his eyes and claws showed the beast beneath. Transform, Roken snarled, his voice distorted. Fight me properly, or die like the half-breed you are. No, Kale's voice remained steady. I don't need to become a monster to beat you. Roken roared and charged. What followed was brutal. Roken used his size and strength, throwing Kale across the circle like a doll. Kale used speed and precision, striking at joints and vulnerable points, never letting Roken get a solid grip. Blood stained the packed earth, both combatants bleeding from dozens of cuts and gashes. Through the bond, Alara felt every impact, every wound, every moment of pain. It took everything she had not to run into the circle, to throw herself between them, to stop this madness. But she understood now this was pack law. This was how alphas proved their worth. Interference would dishonor Kale more than losing. So she stood and watched and channeled everything she had through the bond. Strength, certainty, love. Kale felt it. She knew he did because his fighting style shifted, became more aggressive. He stopped merely defending and started attacking, his claws finding flesh, his strikes landing with devastating precision. But Roken was experienced, brutal, willing to do anything to win. He caught Kale by the throat and lifted him off the ground, claws digging deep. Blood poured from the wounds. Through the bond, Alara felt Kale's air cut off, felt his consciousness beginning to fade. No. The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. Roken's head swiveled toward her, and his lips pulled back in a grotesque smile. Watch closely, little queen. This is how real alphas. Kale's transformation was instant and complete. One moment he hung limp in Roken's grip. The next, he exploded into his beast form with such violence that Roken staggered backward. Kale the beast landed on all fours, then rose to his full height. He was massive, dark-furred, eyes blazing with amber fire. But unlike Roken's transformation, this one felt different, controlled. The beast was present, but so was Kale. He looked at Alara, and she felt his consciousness through the bond, fully aware, fully present. The man and beast merged into something greater than either alone. Impossible, Roken breathed. You can't be conscious during full transformation. That's Kale struck. The fight that followed was savage beyond anything that had come before. Two massive beasts, claws and teeth, strength against strength. But Kale had something Roken didn't: the bond. Every time he faltered, Alara pushed strength through their connection. Every time pain threatened to overwhelm him, she anchored him with her presence. They were fighting together, even though she stood outside the circle. Roken realized it too. His eyes found Alara, and hatred blazed in them. He broke away from Kale and lunged not at his opponent, but at her. The crowd screamed. The elders shouted. But Roken was too fast to determine. Alara stood frozen, watching death approach in the form of a massive silver beast. Through the bond, she felt Kale's absolute terror, his desperate need to reach her in time. He wouldn't. Roken was too close. Time seemed to slow. She saw Roken's claws extended, saw the killing intent in his eyes, felt Kale's presence in her mind, trying to give her strength, trying to protect her even as he was too far away. Something inside her snapped. Power flooded through her, not from Kale, but from somewhere deeper. The bond blazed white hot, and suddenly she could see everything. The threads of connection between every Lycan present, the ebb and flow of pack dynamics, the way power moved through them like water. She grabbed those threads with her mind and pulled. Roken stopped mid-lunge, his body going rigid. Around the circle, every Lycan gasped and staggered as the power dynamic shifted. The elder's eyes went wide with shock. Impossible, she breathed. She's commanding the pack. Magic. But that requires. Alara didn't hear the rest. All her focus was on Roken, on holding him frozen while Kale closed the distance. The power burned through her like fire, more than she could safely channel, more than a human body should contain. But she held it anyway. Kale reached them in seconds. His massive, clawed hand closed around Roken's throat, lifting the rival alpha off the ground. Through the bond, Alara felt Kale's question: kill or spare? Spare him, she gasped. Show mercy. Show them you're better. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. The beast wanted blood, wanted vengeance for the threat to its mate. But then Kale's consciousness pushed through, and he loosened his grip just enough. Submit, he growled, the word barely intelligible through his transformed jaws. Submit or die. Roken's eyes blazed with hatred. But he was beaten, and he knew it. Slowly, painfully, he bared his throat, the universal sign of submission among Lycans. Kale held him there a moment longer, making sure the pack witnessed it. Then he dropped Roken to the ground and stepped back. The elder's voice rang out. The challenge is complete. King Kale Vorner remains alpha of the Northern Reach. The pack erupted in howls, some celebratory, some reluctant, all acknowledging the outcome. Kale began to shift back to human form, the transformation smooth and controlled. Blood still poured from his wounds, and he swayed on his feet. Alara ran to him. She caught him as he collapsed, his weight dragging them both to the ground. She cradled his head in her lap, her hands pressing against the worst wounds, trying to stem the bleeding. You won, she said, tears streaming down her face. Kale, you won, we won. His hand found hers, blood-slicked fingers threading through hers. Couldn't have done it without you. Whatever that was you did, I don't know what I did. The power had faded, leaving her shaking and exhausted. I just knew I had to stop him. Had to give you time. You commanded the pack magic. The elder knelt beside them, her expression odd. Only those with alpha blood can do that. Which means she studied Alara with new eyes. Your father's line wasn't as human as everyone believed. Alara stared at her. I don't understand. It doesn't matter right now, Kale groaned, trying to sit up. We need to get you both to the healers. You're both in shock, both burned through more power than you should have. Hands lifted them careful, reverent. Elara found herself being carried back to the fortress, Kale beside her. Through the bond, she felt his pride, his love, his absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The next hours passed in a blur. Healers tended their wounds, fed them broths and teas that tasted of earth and moonlight. Aldrich came and went, reporting that Roken had left the territory, his supporters scattered. The pack was settling, accepting what they'd witnessed. By evening, Elara and Kale were alone in his chambers, wrapped in blankets before the fire. She lay against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the bond pulse steadily between them. You have alpha blood, he said quietly. Your father must have been Lycan, or at least partly. Hidden his nature, lived as human. That's why the bond formed so fast, so strong. That's why the beast recognized you immediately. I'm not fully human. She tested the words, trying to understand what they meant. I never knew. Does it change how you feel? About yourself? About us? She thought about it, then shook her head. I'm still the same person. Still the debt collector's daughter who scrubbed floors and made herself invisible. But maybe she looked up at him. Maybe I don't have to be invisible anymore. No, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You definitely don't. You're the queen of the Northern Reach now. My mate, my strength. The woman who commanded pack magic and faced down a rival alpha without flinching. I was terrified. So was I. Still am a little. He pulled her closer. But less than before. Because I'm not alone anymore. We face everything together now, together, she echoed, and through the bond felt his absolute agreement. Outside, the moon rose not full, but bright enough to paint the world in silver. In the forest beyond the fortress, wolves howled. Inside, in the warmth and safety of their chambers, the Lycan King and his queen held each other and began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would be all right. They had faced the beast, survived the challenge, discovered truths neither expected, and through it all, the bond held strong, not weakening them, but forging them into something greater than either could have been alone. Elara closed her eyes and let herself feel it, the connection. The love, the future stretching before them, full of possibility and danger and hope. She was no longer invisible, no longer nothing. She was a queen, a mate, the woman who had walked into darkness and brought light, and that was enough. Epilogue. The Moon's Daughter. 3 months after the challenge, Elara stood on the fortress battlements watching the full moon rise. She no longer feared transformation nights. Instead, she spent them in the dungeons with Kale, her presence anchoring him, the bond, keeping him aware even in his most primal form. The silver chains remained, but they hung loose now, barely necessary. The beast still emerged, but it was gentler, more controlled. Some nights, it even let her stroke its fur while it dozed in her lap. The pack had accepted her, grudgingly at first, then with genuine respect. She'd proven herself not just in the combat circle, but in the day-to-day governance of the territory. She mediated disputes, organized defenses, even led hunting parties when Kale was occupied with alpha business. She was no longer playing at being queen. She had become one. You look thoughtful. Kale's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. She leaned back into his warmth, feeling the bond hum contentedly between them. Just thinking about how much has changed, she said. 3 months ago, I was a nobody scrubbing pots in Grey Hollow. Now I'm everything, he finished. You're everything. She turned in his arms to face him. We're everything. Together, he smiled, genuine, warm, nothing like the cold alpha who'd met her in the throne room that first night. Together, he agreed. They stood like that as the moon rose higher, painting the world in silver light. In the distance, wolves howled. Inside the fortress, the pack gathered for the monthly feast. Life continued, full of challenges and joys and the endless work of leadership, but none of it felt like a burden anymore, because Elara had learned the truth that took her 18 years to find. She was never nothing. She had always been extraordinary, waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right bond to reveal her strength, and Kale had learned that control wasn't about restraint or chains or pushing people away. True strength came from connection, from allowing yourself to be vulnerable. With someone who saw your monsters and loved you anyway. They were broken. Pieces that fit together perfectly. The debt collector's daughter and the beast king. the invisible girl and the alpha who finally saw her, together. They would face whatever came next, challenges and battles and transformations, with the certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. In each other's arms, under the moon, home, the end.